Hello, welcome to Kraftwerker. So I want to talk and ask questions about the ergonomics of guitar pedals. I've always had my preferences in what I want in a pedal from an ergonomic point of view. So this is not about the tone or anything like that. This is purely about the ergonomics and the usability and the interface of the pedals. And one of the reasons, well, there's a few reasons. There's a few reasons I want to talk about it. One is because I'm building pedals, and it would be nice to know what is important to people, or at least what's important to the majority of people. Secondly, um, there's my preferences and why. Then there's also some purely practical reasons why pedals should most likely be a certain way. Then there's the usability factor, and what I mean by that is what you expect from a usability point of view. So let me start with my preferences. It's probably biased from my age, but when I started playing guitar, Boss and Ibanez pedals were the thing, and those Rocktech ones, DoD, and they all used this style of switch, which is my favorite style of switch. The Boss pedals, the DoD pedals, and some of the Ibanez pedals, which have the kind of little silver little pad that you click on. Now, mine actually broke. I thought it was a very flimsy way. I don't have a Boss pedal anymore, weirdly, but I bought this one because I was gonna. Well, I'll get into that later. There's a reason I bought the Behringer Overdrive Distortion. I'll make a video about that later because there's actually a reason I bought this. Anyway, point is, it does show you, however, the kind of switch I prefer. I prefer everything to be as expected. Meaning that if you buy a pedal, it takes the standard 9-volt plug. It plugs in from right to left. You've got your dial set a certain way, gain, tone, volume. From the way you're looking, gain, tone, volume. So there's this kind of expected user interface. When it comes to digital stuff and phones and software and websites, you have a UX experience, and you've got people dedicated to that for a reason, because they want the user experience of the product to be easy, predictable, repeatable, no learning curve, no need to read a manual. Okay? And although pedals are so much more simpler than an iPhone or a new piece of software or a website, I still think that there's a certain kind of practical rule that people should follow. Just like your pedal chain on a pedal board shouldn't be a hard and fast rule, but there are certain reasons why certain things are done in a certain way. And they actually come from the real world and practical applications and reasons. So, looking at the pedals that are out there, I see such a variety of designs, not just the actual design of what the pedal does, but also where the plugs are, how much volt it takes, all these kind of things. And it kind of flies in the face of this trend to build these massive pedal boards, because the more disjointed the sizes and plug positions and all these kind of things are on the pedal, it impacts the ease of building a nice big pedal board. Now, obviously, certain pedals just require more space, or just purely from their function and how they're built and how the circuit works, and the size of the required circuits, or does it have tubes in it or whatever, or valves, and there'll have to be some differences in the pedals. Now I can accept that, so I kind of want to set that aside, because there are obviously certain times when things just need to be slightly different, and people, if they want that sort of tone and functionality, they're just going to have to live with those differences. But I'll start with some of the reasons I have for liking the kind of Boss style pedals and always prefer them. Number one is the kind of predictable size. They're all exactly the same size. They all go from right to left and use a 9-volt. But the biggest thing is actually this. Now this could just be a perception, but I always felt like that these switches they just to me seem more flimsy. And one of the reasons is the angle at which you depress them. This is a flat pedal, and you press down on it. So that's fine, but when you come from the grunge and the punk era, right, or the post-punk, whatever you want to call it, you want to stomp on your pedal. You want to, go from clean to distortion, and you want to show people that that's what's going to happen now. So you want to stomp that pedal. And you don't want to really stomp these. One of the reasons is that they are kind of 90 degrees, and your foot comes down like this, so you always put a bit of pressure forward, and you kind of feel like, is this going to damage the switch? Whereas this has that angle, where if you put your foot on the floor, your heel, you can press down. Whereas here, if you put your foot on the floor and you press down, you feel like you're giving it like a forward and a downward kind of pressure. Anyway, people complain about the Boss pedals. They're flimsy. I don't know. That's not my experience. Anyway, point is, so that's the kind of thing I like. Now, when you start getting into the rounds of the tone, we're kind of used to pedals having kind of one knob or three knobs, right? You've got gain, tone, and volume, or rate, feedback, tone. You always have like three. It's kind of like usual. So when you get to pedals that have more than that, it starts getting a bit more complex, obviously from a circuit point of view and where things go. But that actually brings me to another question. Do people prefer to have more flexibility in their tone on whatever pedal they get? I mean, one knob fuzz pedals are everywhere now, and I don't see a problem with it, because it's a pedal builder or designer creating a tone and gives you that tone, and you either like that tone or you don't. You can argue that depending on your own chain of equipment, that you might need some sort of ability to shape the tone to get it right, because because each pedal has their own kind of EQ-y thing that happens, so you want to be able to kind of fix the EQ on the pedal, so you don't have to, because you can't realistically fix the tone on the amp for every single pedal, especially if you're playing live or using a pedal board in that way. You need to be able to shape your EQ on your pedal to suit your kind of bass amp settings. So is that an important factor, to be able to have huge flexibility on the tone? Or are you happy with, like, okay, this is the kind of EQ that you get, deal with it? Because one of my biggest beef with the small factor amps, all these little practice amps, even the really good ones, is that most of them only have one tone control, and to me it's like, fucking, it's a sweep, right? And I can't imagine it being that much more complex to add a good 3-band EQ tone stack, just to give people that ability to deal with their bass, their mids, and their highs separately, rather than have this weird kind of sweep, which is kind of manufacturer set for you, that these are the tones you're going to get within that sweep. They usually sound absolutely great, but I still feel like there's some sort of piece missing that doesn't allow you to really control your EQ the way you might want. And I also find that, or I can only imagine that if you have one of these amps, although they sound good, the moment that you add a really powerful EQ section, it suddenly becomes a really good amp and a really versatile amp, because suddenly you can really start shaping your tones to anything that you want. I'm talking specifically about, the small oranges and things like that. Anyway, so here's some examples. So some of these are mine, obviously, and some of these are from other manufacturers. So here's an example of one where you can understand why this thing is an absolute bastard of a beast. It complicates your life because it's massive and it's kind of outside of the usual shape. The inputs are quite high, which means that if you've got a pedal next to it, it kind of wants to overlap. You've got to use an additional an extra, its own power supply, because it requires a lot more power, because it's a 210 or 220 volt tube in here. So you can't just run it off your kind of standard power supply. So you can understand why a pedal like this, for example, has to be a little bit different and outside of the norm, because what you're getting is not something that you could get in any other way. I put these two together, and with this one I could neatly get them all on one side at the top, which I think is the preference to most people, to have your in and output in the top, in the front top, and your power supply, so that when you're rigging your pedal board, you can stack them much closer together, and you've got kind of like the same points all along. And this one, I couldn't fit it, so I put them in the standard position, the inputs on the side, but the power at the front. But again, you could argue, well, if you look at the sizes, they're slightly different, so you've got these little offsets. So, and then obviously you've got, your standard setups, your one knob, your typical three knob, input left and right, and your power. Now, for example, in these, I don't want to put the power up top, because I find I'd rather than have, if I'm already using the space on the side for the inputs, then I don't want to have another space taken away by another input. So rather than, group them together. So now I might have lost stacking space side by side, but it allows more space at the top to move it closer or whatever you need to do. I think that the front inputs are probably best, if at best possible. So then you've got this kind of form factor now, which which is so popular now from a lot of the Chinese manufacturers. And I don't know if this is a good thing. If you only have small ones, if you have small ones, only small ones, you've got a problem. And if you've got a small one in between big ones, you also have a problem. And here is the problem. Feet size. When you stack them, even for my feet, that gets a little bit close. So you start running this danger of pressing more than one button than you wish, activating pedals that you don't want. And that's another reason why I found this kind of style, because they have exactly the right width, which is not too wide, but wide enough that you don't necessarily step on the kind of neighboring pedals. Now, it might sound like I'm making a lot about this, but I find that the user experience of any item being very important. So the whole point of this video is to try and solicit some feedback from, pedal folk, to see what is it that's important to you. What does the ergonomics of the pedal actually influence you purchasing it? Would you buy something expensive and might be ergonomically kind of funky because you really like the tone that it creates? Or is that ergonomics, that user experience of the pedal actually a massive factor in your purchasing decision making? And also, I'm trying to see if there's an overall preference to the ergonomics of a pedal. I feel like where we are now, like if you ignore what I said about Boss pedals and all that from the past, if we look now to the current pedals that are being built by pretty much everyone, have we kind of defaulted to this size, this kind of layout? And is this any good? I mean, could it be better? Should the pedals be slightly bigger so that you've got a bit more space, or should they be smaller so you can fit more pedals on your pedal board? There's all these questions to be asked, and it would be really interesting to see what people in general feel about this, because if you look on Instagram or you're in the pedal communities and you see the pedals that come out, I mean, these long thin ones with all the knobs at the top make no sense to me, right? They look cool and all that, but once it gets to actually using the thing, you go, this is just going to be an issue, right? So there's all these weird shapes, there's all these strange inputs. Then there's the whole voltage thing. Like, just make them all 9 volt. And if you want to build a pedal that requires 18 volt or 12, just put a charge pump inside rather than requiring it to have a higher input. Now there's obviously exceptions, and you can understand exceptions. And this is a classic exception where you really need, I think this is 22 volts and 1.1 amp goes in here. So not like, 50 milliamps and 9 volts. So you can understand why certain specific pedals do need it, and then it's up to you to decide if you are happy to deal with that. So please put a wee comment in the bottom. What aspects of the ergonomics of the pedals are important to you? Input, plug positions, voltages, dials. Before I forget, that's another thing. If you have a classic set of controls, gain, tone, volume, they follow a certain set from left to right, so you're left to right. How important is the markings on the pedal to you? For example, I specifically put a big knob on this so that you can see where your volume's sitting at. At the same time, no matter how obvious you try and make the markings, or visible you try and make markings, there will be places and times in weird gigs and weird venues where you will not be able to see your dial position. So is the dial position indicator be visibly that important? Or is it that important for it to be very, very visible? Because usually there's no such thing really as a true kind of indicator, a true kind of knob with like true settings. I mean, there are obviously some exceptions, but generally it's like turn or not, like, yeah, it's on 12 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever, and that's fine. And most of it is done by ear. Like, your gain is done by ear. You're not going to get a pedal with a description that says, right, this is the exact amount of gain you're going to get at 11 o'clock, right? You're going to be tweaking that by ear, or what sounds good. for future reference where it was, yeah, you might need to see where the indicator was. But you know what, even in the past on the Boss pedals, which are fairly clear, I put little Sharpie marks on my preferred positions, and I just made sure, you know, when I unpacked them, that they are on those settings, and I was good to go. So other markings and indicators, is it really important to be able to always see them? Because you kind of can't. The only way you could do that is by having a digital display of your settings in some sort of digital format, or by having little you know, fluorescent kind of markers for everything, so you can see it in any light. The LEDs to use, do you have a preference in color? Red, blue, white, orange, whatever. Very bright, because I've seen people complain, oh, don't put that blue light on there because it's like really bright and it blinds you. And literally you'll hear another person say, oh my god, I can't see it, I wish they would put bright blue lights on my pedal, and LED lights. So people are different and they expect different things, and people have different eyesights as well. So have a bit of a think, have a bit of a comment, see what is actually really important to you from an ergonomic user point of view on your pedals. And like, subscribe, and share, and buy stuff, and support this channel, and do all that stuff so that we don't go broke. Thank you. Take care.